Good morning and welcome to the early morning edition of Perspectives on Politics. Once again, I am your host, Sean Williams, professor of political science here at Campbellsville University. And I have with me today an extended panel to talk about one of the more controversial topics that have come up in the last year and a half. We're here today to discuss the Black Lives Matter movement. And particularly what we want to discuss is whether or not the stated goals or aims of BLM will actually result in the goals or outcomes that the Black Lives Matter movement is hoping to accomplish. I have joining me today several of our returning panelists who wanted to have a conversation about this topic. Going from top to bottom on my screen, I have Hunter Kelly. Mr. Kelly, welcome.
Thank you.
Malcolm Walker joining me this morning. Mr. Walker.
Thank you.
Also coming in is Carson Kovalik. Ms. Kovalik, welcome to class.
Thank you.
I also have Jordan Sharrow joining us.
Hey.
Howard Smith in today. How are you doing, Mr. Smith?
Pretty good.
And then joining us by special request, Mr. Jason Beasley. How are you, sir?
Making it.
It's tough making it in the world today. It takes everything you got. I understand. So let's go ahead and jump right into our topic. I would assume that at this point, most of the viewers, if you've been brought into this podcast or if you've watched any of our previous podcasts, are probably familiar with the Black Lives Matter movement. But for those who might not be, somebody get us started and explain to us a little bit about what the origins of BLM were and where this movement came from.
Okay. Well, the Black Lives Matter movement actually started as a hashtag, something that happened around Trayvon Martin's death back in the early 10s. And then after that short time, it kind of faded away until 2013. And around that time, that's when organizations and like chapters started being, brought into U.S. across multiple cities, and that is around 2013, 2014, around that time.
Mm-hmm. So whenever the movement started really crystallizing, whenever it started to shift from sort of the hashtag activism that you're talking about to something where there are actual goals that were being trying to accomplish, what were some of the primary goals of BLM? What was their complaint? What were they hoping would happen?
I think obviously a main issue that they have is like the deaths of African Americans. And so I think they're just trying to prevent like unnecessary deaths or like honestly really just unnecessary deaths of anyone. But I would think specifically geared towards African Americans. But I know that a lot of the issues that they have is like police brutality, like that's just not needed.
And I think it's largely because of that emphasis on police brutality that we have seen a resurgence of the organization and its return to prominence in the public debate, especially over the summer. So let's fast forward into 2020. What's happened in the last 6 months to a year that has kind of reinvigorated the Black Lives Matter movement?
So George Floyd was he died at the hands of a police officer. A police officer kneeled on him in Minnesota, and that sparked the beginning of the protests in Minnesota and around the United States. And then Breonna Taylor died in Louisville in a police shooting, and that started it in Louisville. And then there's been protests ever since, and then it's continued to pile on throughout the year.
These protests, I guess they've had some significant protests in Washington State, significant protests in Minnesota, also in Atlanta. it seemed as though that there for a while, just about every police shooting, especially if an African American male was involved, led to increased protests. Do you know of anyone? Do any of you guys personally know of someone who participated in a BLM protest, or is this something that's been more distant to rural Campbellsville, Kentucky?
Well, I know that there was one like on campus, like that some students put together and participated in. So I think that like shows that there's like actually going to be change, or like that a lot of people are seeking change, because I mean we are in rural Campbellsville, and I know we're at a university, so that kind of like makes it different. But there were protests that like happened downtown and like on campus.
Anybody else? Anyone have any form of sort of intimate familiarity with the protests or with people who were involved?
So yeah, I'm from Mercer County, Kentucky, and we're way smaller than Campbellsville. And we had a small protest when Breonna Taylor was killed. And it lasted there was a couple days where they had protests on Main Street, but it wasn't very long. But it's still just shocking to see that even in rural Kentucky, like rural Kentucky, that they still are people who wanted to participate in the protests.
Yeah, I think you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who doesn't have some connection from someone they know or love that has participated in one recently. And I think a lot of it has to do with one, just how big the movement's got. But in addition, also the fact that one of the killings that really prompted or led to such a large outtake in the country was in Louisville, which is, in Kentucky, obviously. And so I think it's really hard. You'll be hard pressed to find someone in Kentucky specifically who doesn't have some kind of connection to a protest that has happened, early fall or in the summer.
So we know that broadly speaking, as you guys have already mentioned, that the goal of the movement is to end police brutality, reduce the number of African American males who are being killed by police. So that's their goal. What are some of the tactics or the techniques, some of the strategies that BLM as an organization has recommended as a way of trying to reduce the number of police killing?
Education, higher education, to be more specific. I think that based on my research, there was a lot of information that I uncovered that kind of alluded to that. So like if you have police who are higher educated, they're less likely to resort to police brutality as their first choice, or like first mode of like coming to the crime. So I think like having higher education is like a good like point that they could go to. And I think that they do go towards that. So that's just what I found in my research was higher education.
So by higher education, are you talking about just sending police officers to a police academy? Are you talking about
associate's degree or higher? That's like what the all my research pointed to. And it's not necessarily like everyone who goes to college is like automatically like, oh, they're not gonna kill someone for no reason. It's just like it kind of puts them in, they get a better like perspective of like how you're supposed to like arrive on scene, because although like you need to have experience to be like a police officer, and not to be a police officer, but to like know what you're supposed to do whenever you go to the scene, but like having an education like in criminal justice specifically, or just like something police related, it allows them to like really see the research behind like police related killings and just like police brutality in general, and like the level of like force that you're supposed to use like for any incident, like based on what your perpetrator's doing, and then what you need to do in return.
Any others? Other strategies? So I guess in your research, evidence suggests that improving the education level of police officers actually does have a reducing effect on violence?
Yeah, for the most part. There was one source that said it just kind of like makes their attitude a little better, but I think that kind of can play into like the level of force that they use as well. So I mean, I kind of geared that force towards like less likely to take another's life, but for the most part, all my sources pointed and said that higher education can lead to lower killings.
So that liberalizing effect that people talk about that college has apparently reaches all the way to police departments.
Yeah.
Any others? What are any of the other stated goals of Black Lives Matters movement?
Yeah, there's actually a couple. For Black Lives Matter, there's things such as, like, as my panelist said, education, defunding the police, as well as creating better housing in poverty-stricken areas, and a better source of healthcare within Black communities, and more affordable care, things of that nature. For my research, one of the bigger things I went into depth to was the defunding of the police, and what that the big thing that comes with that, is a lot of people don't necessarily agree with the defunding of the police. So what comes with defunding the police is not the fact that they're trying to abolish the police, but just the mere fact that when you cut the budget of the police, you can redistribute the money to different services, such as having more like books for schools, as well as healthcare, like more budgeting for healthcare and things of that nature.
Yeah, my research kind of looked at like the alternatives you could use that funding on, and more specifically, just like revitalizing and rebuilding African American communities.
And how would, when you say revitalizing and repairing, what exactly do you mean? Like installing more playgrounds or
Well, yeah, it can be a lot of different things. Like, for instance, you can have things like building better public schools, building better places for kids to go. And a lot of it, too, is just cleaning up kind of like damage in these areas that kind of leave signs of crime, which is kind of like a question that we're looking at later maybe. But all these things to just kind of help bring jobs and more money into the area.
So turning back to the defund the police movement for a second, and then we'll move forward, as Mr. Sherrill suggested, discussing neighborhood revitalization. But just the idea of defunding the police. I mean, many of these neighborhoods are some of the higher crime neighborhoods in America, largely because of many minority neighborhoods are also some of the more impoverished neighborhoods in urban America. Why does the BLM movement, or the supporters of the defund the police strategy, why do they feel that fewer police will lead to less crime, as opposed to needing more police to confront crime?
Yeah. You can go.
Okay. That one's a little bit puzzling, I think, to a lot of people. And I don't have the research to, say why they do for sure. But I do know that, it's kind of proven in a lot of cases that the more police in an area, the less crime that'll happen. It just kind of happens. And again, there's, unintended consequences from that, such as police state, or maybe more killings of minorities. But that's just kind of a proven fact. And I mean, I see why you wouldn't want more police in an area that you live. You don't want to create that police state, but it is a bit puzzling to a lot of people, including myself, why that would be the solution when the data shows differently in a lot of cases. So if any panelists, have some evidence to dispute me, I'd love to hear it.
I thought it was kind of interesting you say like a lot of places don't want police in their neighborhoods, but like,
Well, I wouldn't say.
what? There's research that like kind of suggests otherwise for like white neighborhoods, which is interesting because like I don't have a problem with having like fewer police or more police. I think it just has to do with like, it does have to do with race, and we don't realize sometimes how it affects other people. But I know that like there's richer neighborhoods like want to have more police, and like if there's not, it's like, oh my gosh, we don't have police now, there's going to be crime. So I thought that was interesting.
Mr. Smith, did you want to jump in?
Yeah. As far as myself being an African American male, obviously I have African American family, and we stayed. Some of my family stay in like high populated cities such as Chicago, Memphis, Nashville, Houston, stuff like that. So when it comes to it, I remember we having these conversations about it. When it comes to it, it's not the fact that we don't think that having more police in the area wouldn't help confront crime. Of course, we don't want crime to happen, whether if it's black crime or white crime, whatever crime is bad for everybody. But what we're saying is, when it comes to when people police, it's more putting money into the actual community. You put money into the community where you have places where kids can go, like after school programs. You put funding into Section 8 housing for better housing for those impoverished black people. It would be much likely for them to have crime because of that. Now you giving these people avenue to actually work and actually thrive in this situation. When you put more police officers into an area where it's already a high crime rate, I can go off self-experience and just knowing people's own neighborhoods. Honestly, they really don't care how many police officers there. They will do what they need to do to either make their money legally or illegally to feed their family, just like anybody else would illegally through corporate or through just honest paying labor jobs. But they just do it the legal way by selling narcotics, doing illegally robbing people and stuff like that. So when you defund the police and use that money to help benefit the community instead of adding more funding to police, just adding more police officers, you can cause either more chaos by adding more police officers, or you can try to diffuse the situation by giving people resources to thrive in that community, which is really what defunding the police is all about.
So I agree with Howard, and I think what he's saying is that there's better ways to control crime than just adding more police to an area. There's more efficient ways you can go about it. Because even though you're adding more police, that's going to have a positive effect on crime. You're going to find more crimes too when you add the police. So it's helping crime, but it's definitely causing other issues as well.
Yeah, and I think maybe like defunding is like the wrong word. I think for a lot of people, I think maybe reallocation of money, because I think that's kind of how it was described just now. I think like the money needs to be put maybe like in other areas and not just like taking like, I think defund is just an aggressive word. And I think that's why a lot of people are against it, which, like, I mean, I don't have a problem with reallocation of money. And I think that that's what it is, because I think there does need to be more education and, like, better money needs to go into lower income areas because it needs it. Like, I mean, the schools need it, the kids need it, the families need it. And I think that it just is aggressive sometimes when definitely right-wing people hear it and they're like, oh my gosh, you guys want to have crime in your area because there's not going to be police officers to like stop it. And it's like, no, we want it to decrease, because if we have money in our community, then maybe like we can stop committing crimes or whatever. And so I think it's more of a reallocation.
It's interesting. It's an interesting problem, and it's one that people who study policy have been aware of. The defund the police brand tag, right? That hashtag, that motto, it creates lots of problems in terms of the sales pitch. But on the other hand, I wonder if the argument had been, no, don't defund the police, but rather let's increase taxes so that we can use the increased tax revenue, don't redistribute resources, but just simply bring in more resources. Would the more taxes to help pay for the development of African-American neighborhoods, would that have been an any more effective sales pitch to its opponents? I mean, what do you think?
I think that's a hard question.
I'm not for sure if adding more taxes is something everybody wants. A lot of people are for the tax cuts that Trump implemented, which was a pretty good thing. A lot of people had more money in their pockets. So I don't know that essentially raising taxes for everyone would have been like the best idea. The police, their budget's over $100 billion, and just in New York, last year they had $6 billion just for their police budget. So going back to what Carson says, the reallocation of money, I think, is the best route to go instead of raising taxes for other people, for the people. So that gets reallocated to the health department, as well as homeless services, things like youth community development, workforces development, and things of that nature. There's also other programs that can be implemented. My research that I found in Oregon, big cities like Portland and things like that, they came up with a different program, a program called the Crisis Assistance Helping Out in the Streets. So what that is, it's like it's more a people-based type program, also for African Americans that help, insensitivity. So it helps avert harmful arrests and keep from repeating the cycle. Over 50% of police encounters, over 50% of the deaths caused by police are police, encounters. So like press encounters. The rest is, the other citizens calling for the police or things of that nature. So redistribution of this money, can help for other programs just like that. You can see it across the United States.
Mr. Shero, I want to come back to an argument that you made earlier and you kind of moved past. This idea that neighborhood revitalization or neighborhood rehabilitation, that essentially making the environment better, leads to lower crime rates or to better neighborhoods. Is there a lot of evidence to support the argument that neighborhood improvement actually improves the lives of the African Americans who live in those areas?
Well, it's an interesting question because it starts with this theory called the broken windows theory, which kind of dictates or illustrates that when there's obvious visual signs of crime in an area, that promotes an environment of further crime, basically because people feel that it's already a crime-ridden area that the police don't really care about. And so the theory kind of states that if you rebuild these communities to where they look nice and there's no broken windows per se, that the crime will actually go down in that area because of that. And the evidence to support it is pretty weak and inconclusive at best, if I'm going to be honest, just after my research.
I have several friends, a couple of friends, and for a living, they have decided to take on the project of neighborhood revitalization and rehabilitation. They use a number of government programs to help to go in and particularly focusing on rebuilding or repairing and redesigning neighborhoods or apartment complexes. And in my conversations with them, and I don't know if any of y'all have seen the same thing in the research, but they seem to suggest that what happens is rather than so much improving the quality of life in an African-American neighborhood, that one of the effects of revitalization is that you make the neighborhood less African-American. Is there any truth to that, or is that just an argument that they're kind of making?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of truth to that. In my research, I kind of found that there's this thing called gentrification, which is once you start really rebuilding an area, revitalizing it, the property values kind of go through the roof. And then kind of because of the socioeconomic status of the people who are living there, they no longer can afford to live there and they have to move out. And therefore it kind of switches the dynamics of the neighborhood. And it's kind of hard to tell if the drop in crime, like what it's truly related to.
So in terms of truly related to, whether it's related to fixing the environment for the people who live there now, or replacing the people who live there with a more affluent population. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, generally wealthier.
Okay.
I think the only way in order to combat this is the local communities have to start it from themselves. They have to rebuild their community themselves. I don't think they can take government funding without it leading to gentrification, if that makes sense.
Any other, before we move on, any other thoughts or perspectives on either the idea of raising taxes to provide more resources to local areas, or defunding the police in general?
Yeah. So I think it was President Obama in a speech a couple days ago or weeks ago, where he kind of renounced that saying of defund the police. I think he called it a catchy catchphrase or something that really doesn't mean a whole lot, but is just used to get people fired up, which I think makes sense because, it's so easy to be an activist when all you do is, send out a tweet or put a hashtag on something. And I think that's, not saying Black Lives Matter hasn't done some important stuff, but I think that's one reason you see it at such a large scale because of these these catchphrases that are easy to, say you're being an activist, but not really doing a whole lot. And so that's why I think the, reallocation of funds by raising taxes would be even worse because that actually requires people to do something, which is give up more of their money. And I think when it comes down to it, they'll say a phrase on Twitter, but they won't actually, do anything about it and aren't willing to give their own money for it. So I think, that's an even worse idea. And I agree that, and I think you need to understand that defund of police doesn't mean to defund it completely. But I think, it's such a catchy phrase that that's why it's caught on so much. And then just real quick for, just to play devil's advocate a little bit. I think, it's kind of hard. I think there's a little bit of opposing views or contradictory views because, defunding the police, taking away their funding on one hand, but on the other hand, you want more training and more, training for certain things. Well, I think the training costs a little bit of money. Not saying I believe everything, but, it's a little bit of devil's advocate because I think you need more funding to do more training, but you can't do that if you take away the money. So it's a little bit opposing. I don't know. It's just something I was thinking about.
Right. I think the inconsistency there is a lot of the reasons why there's a lot of people not supporting the movement as much as you would think they would. The lack of consistency I see across the movements as well is another reason why I feel defund the police won't work. You have one group calling for defund the police and then the next group's calling for the abolishment of the police. I don't think people understand which side and which group and which everything that is going on. I don't think they understand where defund the police is truly coming from because I haven't seen it on a lot of websites that support Black Lives Matter, a part of the coalition.
Mr. Kelly, you bring up an interesting point that has something to do with the structural dynamic, not just of BLM, but of a lot of more leftist organizations. You've got an organization that philosophically doesn't necessarily like the idea of centralization and command and control, but the result of that is that you have messages that are coming from local chapters that maybe are not necessarily in line with the national chapter. Is defund the police, and this is me speaking as much from ignorance as anything else, is defund the police a position that's taken by the BLM nationally as a whole, or is abolish the police a national organization position, or is this something that's really more being pushed?
Yeah, the defunding of police
By local chapters.
Yeah, the Defunding of Police is Black Lives Matter's national, organization. One of their goals. Like again, it's not the getting rid of the police. It's the call to redistribute funds for all these different services. So that's the biggest thing that comes out of it. To speak on the education part, it's the same thing. Like making these police officers have at least associate's degree, or having to go through college so that it's they have a degree or whatever, or training, and then once they go to training, it takes longer for them to finish their police officer training. The same thing as they have more of a their law training, going over the laws is longer. I think it doesn't take police officer too long to a couple months in their law training and encountering with before like they're out on the job, encountering with other citizens. So I think the time frame or whatever for police officers to become police officers is needed, as well as a better understanding of how to interact with all citizens of all races. So that's a big part that comes with defunding the police, is more education for the police. Not necessarily, and taking away those funds doesn't necessarily take away the training. It just makes the time frame longer.
I feel that Malcolm is correct on a certain aspect of it, but I feel like it's more locally. Defund the police has definitely been more of a local goal rather than a national goal, because if you go to blacklives.com, which is the coalition of several Black Lives Matter organizations, and this includes the Black Lives Matter Network that was founded in 2013, along with the Black Lawyers of America and other groups like that. They call for abolishment of the police, and that would be more of a national standard than local standard, if that makes sense.
So one of the things that I feel like we have to address before we run out of time is the tactics that are being used, first of all, by Black Lives Matters and supporting organizations, as well as some of the intentional or unintentional consequences. Specifically, one of the primary tactics that BLM has pursued, particularly since the Breonna Taylor and George Floyd killings, has been the use of street protests. And the stated position is nonviolent civil disobedient protests. However, in many places, these nonviolent protests have had fairly violent consequences. How effective do you guys feel the use of civil disobedience has been for Black Lives Matter in terms of changing public opinion to their favor? And to what degree, as a follow-up, to what degree do you feel like they've lost control of that because of the violence that's occurring sort of parallel to it? And this is a question for anybody.
I mean, I feel like it's definitely got it in the media, which gets people thinking about it. And I don't know if maybe that's just the main goal, to make sure that Americans are aware of what's going on, or what. But I don't think that the whole organization is for violence. I think that some of that just kind of stems from individuals who are gonna promote violence no matter what. And so I think that just getting it in the media is a big thing that's made it a lot of people more aware of what's going on.
And I think if you really want to change the wheels of change moving, you've got to put pressure on the government. And I think that's exactly what these protests have been doing. They've been putting pressure on the local and state governments to make change. And if nothing else, is keeping them in the media and keeping people talking about it.
Just in my opinion, I feel like these protests, I feel like what Jordan was saying, the pressure, I don't think they applied as much pressure as they should. Say if we still had all the media coverage and the technology we had in the 1960s, where it was protesters and marches almost every week, where Black people were really convinced and they were really determined to get this change going. Now I kind of hate to say it, but now it's more like something happens, it'll be a protest or it'll be a big Twitter trend for maybe a couple days, maybe a week. Then after that, everything goes back to till the next time. I feel like with these protests and the tactics, of course, civil disobedience is gonna say, hey, we want this to change, we need this to change. But for actual change to occur, you have to keep showing the pressure. You have to keep pressing the issue. Just to do it for a couple of days or once out of the month or have a speech every now and then, it's really not going to put pressure on anybody. Because as far as the state and local governments and even the federal governments, they can say they understand, they can say they can hear you, but at the end of the day, they go back to their office, they brush that off, and are like, all right, to the next topic. All right, to where these state funds go for here and here. Nobody's really paying attention. They hear you because it's in the media. The media is always going to put it out there. The media is always going to be next. Because it's weird how the media works now, because you can see when it comes to certain situations how even it'll be right in the middle of protest, in the middle of the night, they'll find like a Black female or a Black male reporter down there to report live on the situation. And they'll show how then the media will really press how we really for Black people and all this. But it's really just all it takes to get the media out there to get us aware for now. But the very next day, the next morning on the news, not really talking about it for too long. They might do a 20-minute segment and move on to the next thing. So for these civil disobedient protests to work, we have to keep on pressing the issue continuously. And that's the only way I think some real change is going to happen.
Yeah, definitely. I believe I agree with what Howard said. I think more pressure needs to be applied. Just having it in the media or getting someone's attention, and people talking about it just as that is not progress. Just one arrest of a police officer that had killed someone is not progress. Prosecuting a police officer on not the killing of Breonna Taylor, but on the shots that miss, it's not progress. If I have a 6-inch knife in my back, you pull it out 3 inches, it's not progress. I still have a knife in my back. So I just think, the idea of, talking about it, NBA players not playing their games, people, protesting and walking and, marching and continue bringing that, that pressure to the, the government. It's something that is needed. For months, Philadelphia, they didn't stop. Way after, Twitter and Instagram quit posting all the protests and stuff, they were out there every single night for, until August. And even so through August, they were still having a whole lot of protests. So, in Louisville and other places like that, Minneapolis, these things kept happening. And that pressure, is something that's good. I think now that it's cold, it's a little bit harder to go out there and protest and march and stuff like that. But I think, things of that nature is needed. And I think they just have to happen.
I think what Malcolm is saying is that if you keep acting retroactively, it's really hard to make progress. So if you keep responding to things happening, like a police officer kills an innocent Black man and you arrest him, that's the right thing to do, but you're not making real progress. You've got to be progressive and get to these, or proactive, and get to these officers before these things even happen in the workplace. Their training and other things like that.
Yeah, I agree actually with Howard about what he said about more pressure. I think just where we disagree is the type of pressure. Howard said more of the the street, not rioting. That's not what he said. I can't remember the word he used. But the thing I think is hurting them from purely strategic standpoint is how they go about it, right? Because I think the way they go about it turns off a large group of people. But I think where the area more pressure should be applied is about, like real policy changes, right? I think there's a narrative to a lot of people that this idea, that, and I'm not saying, I'm one of them and I don't agree with these people, but there is a narrative that a lot of the BLM, supporters are just people who are kind of, out just to destroy stuff or riot stuff. And I think by actually doing real policy things in a more, quote unquote, professional way, talking about policy will be good from a strategic standpoint and a, actually getting things done viewpoint. Take Louisville, for example. They just no-knock raids. And then, that's a real policy change that happened from them putting pressure on the government. And so I'd like to see more discussion about, those type of things, banning no-knock raids nationally, ending qualified immunity, ending police unions, things like that. So I agree that, more pressure. I just think me and Howard disagree a little bit on the way to do that. And I think, my way is, I don't want to say a more perspective way, because I don't think it is, but I think it comes off as a more perspective way. And I think from a purely strategic standpoint, that would help the cause, bringing more people together rather than cutting off or turning away a whole group of people.
Right. Just to add on to what Jason said, I feel that it is really important that the Black Lives Matter organization doesn't allow some of these groups to come in and support them. Like Antifa has been coming in and supporting, and let's be honest, there are a lot of the reasons why there's been looting and riots in the streets. It's not from Black Lives Matter protesters, but they're using the Black Lives Matter hashtags and the Black Lives Matter protest as a way to go in and do these things. And I think it's turning a lot of people away from them. So I think they need to go through a different strategy and get this thing done politically rather than on the streets, because I think it's getting overran by other groups of people that are using their group just to go out and do it.
When you talk about the political consequences of Black Lives Matters, and this is something which we're going to have to unpack as a discipline, political science and sociology as disciplines have to unpack. But we just recently had an election, and the best way to apply pressure to create political change is by replacing politicians. And so on the one hand, it looks like that the problems with COVID combined with Black Lives Matters resulted in higher overall turnout for the most recent election. And Donald Trump, who is considered to be sort of responsible for both of these fairly or unfairly, has lost the presidency and is going to be replaced. But at the same time, it looks like in many parts of the country, the Republican turnout actually resulted in Republican politicians or anti-defund politicians or anti-BLM politicians actually increasing their strength in state legislatures. Do you feel like it's going to be possible for BLM to work with these more conservative lawmakers that have taken office? Or do you feel like the pressures that you guys are talking about will have to be focused at replacing these politicians if they want to redistribute or increase revenue towards their goals? What do you guys think?
I mean, in my mind, when it comes to anything political, it just goes, you gotta know somebody that knows somebody. So when it comes to trying to work with these people or even try to replace them, you really have to appeal to what's really helping them. How is me helping you going to help your situation, and how you helping me is going to help mine? That's basically how it's going to be. So come to think of it, I mean, it's going to be more because knowing how aggressive BLM is, it's going to be hard for them to find a happy compromise or a happy medium when it comes to working with state legislatures. So, because when it comes to Black Lives Matter, it's either you with us or against us for some reason. So when it comes to that type of thing, I think it's going to be very difficult, especially in the beginning, because most people, especially when it comes to certain states, especially red states, they're going to agree more with what's going to get them voters, rather than having their own opinion. But really, what's going to get them voters and what's going to keep them in office, they're going to do that, whether it is the Black Lives Matter movement or not. So when it comes to the Black Lives Matter movement, they should they should start working with legislatures locally and state that already agree with their term and agree, what they want to do and what they want to get accomplished, and just work from there. Besides trying to grab new legislatures.
Well, one question that I've had, and this won't be a question for this panel, this may be a question for the future because we've only got about 25 seconds left. At what point will movements like BLM or even the Democratic Party start to embrace stronger decentralized federalism? Maybe stronger decentralized is the wrong word, but some kind of a movement towards the redistribution of funds back to states as a way of cutting funds to the states that maybe are less supportive of things like BLM, but making sure that wealthier states that are more supportive have the resources they need to address these problems. And I guess that's going to be a question for the future. But we have run out of time. Actually, we've gone a little bit over time. I want to thank my esteemed panelists for joining us today for what is obviously a very hot button issue. And I look forward to finding out whether or not Black Lives Matter is going to be able to maintain their strength going through the winter, as you pointed out, harder to protest in cold months, or whether it's going to sort of fizzle a little bit now that the Trump administration has lost power. But for those of you who are watching, if you enjoy this broadcast, please make sure that you check out some of our previous podcasts on a range of issues related to politics and political science. And join us for our final broadcast that's coming up next Thursday at 8:30 in the morning, as always, where we're going to be talking about the most recent presidential and state elections and some of their consequences. So thank you guys very much, and God bless.
Thank you.